Last week, I presented a 6-second teaser for my new novel, Spellbound. Spellbound is a prequel to Spinsterella, the story which introduced readers to the Matilda Crowley character. And in Spellbound, I wanted to chronicle the Matilda Crowley character's teen years, and I wanted to explain and detail why the Matilda Crowley character wanted to be a part of the goth subculture and what motivated her to become a goth. In some ways, it's a origin story, but it is also a commentary on the African American community at the time. Spellbound is set during 1989, and during the time of 1989, it's a very dark period in New York City history. We have a high homicide rate, we have a high crime rate, and the crack epidemic is going on, and we have black people lumbering about the streets like zombies as they scavenge garbage cans and beg people for change to get $3 or $5 to get that hit of rock from drug dealers who are terrorizing the neighborhood. And the Matilda Crowley character has to navigate this New York City and Sugar Hill, the neighborhood of Sugar Hill, during this dark period in time. And while she's trying to navigate this horrific neighborhood, horrific neighborhood, she has to deal with the dark side of being light skinned. And this is a story that I know personally as a light skinned man that there is a dark side to being light skinned. And a lot of brown skinned people and dark skinned people believe that light skinned people have all sorts of privileges and biracial people have all sorts of privileges and advantages over them. And this pretty much drives a wedge between dark skinned people and light skinned people. And it prevents black people from seeing themselves in a human light. Instead, they start separating off into factions and they start believing one is better than the other, and they start jockeying for the approval of an imaginary white man in their minds. This is how I believe, your African Americans are spellbound. They're mesmerized by the whole concept of transforming themselves into this idea of being this person who will be accepted by white people as what it means to be black. And they try to change themselves into this perfect ideal that will fit into a white world and a white box and will be accepted by white people. This is why they transform themselves into a reflection of what will be seen as black, as acceptable to white people. And that's what one of the things that I explore in Spellbound, because that's what I believe a spellbound Negro is. It's a person who tries to turn themselves into the reflection of what white people see as black instead of trying to define what being black is for themselves. And with the Matilda Crowley character, I explore this woman as she's dealing with this whole dark side of light skin and trying to fit into this black box. These bullies are trying to push her into this black box, and she's trying to push back because she wants to try to be what she sees as black. And these people are telling her that ironically, that she is acting white and that she is betraying her race, and they are attacking her because she has a white father. But when we look at their behaviors, they ironically are trying to be exactly what these white liberals want to see reflected as black. And as the Matilda Crowley character looks down the road at this whole dark side of being light skinned and people trying to push her into that black box, she's starting to say to herself that she's headed down the road of the tragic mulatto. And what is the tragic mulatto? The tragic mulatto is an individual who is half black and half white, and pretty much this biracial person, they don't fit into the black world and they don't fit into the white world. And they feel conflicted regarding their identity, and because they cannot fit in either world, they feel like they become depressed, and in the old stories that were presented this way in publishing, what would happen was the tragic mulatto would either die a death, or they would become an alcoholic and depressed, and then die, or they would commit suicide. And the Matilda Crowley character, looking at her race, her identity, and how it relates to culture, at 16 years old, she sees herself headed down this road of the tragic mulatto, and she says to herself, this looks like my inevitable destiny. And it's not until she runs into a series of events in her life that she starts to see, she's introduced into the goth subculture, and she starts going in that direction, and she sees it as a way from breaking away from the dysfunctional stereotypes and ideas regarding black culture and black identity, and starts to create her own culture and identity. And a lot of people would think that, why would somebody want to be a part of the goth subculture rather than be a part of the mainstream black culture? Well, at the time, during the 1980s, the black culture was pretty much, it's starting to decline, because again, we have the crack epidemic going on, we have dope dealers killing each other, we have a spike in teen pregnancies, we have single mother households, and the whole culture is pretty much dysfunctional, because we have a lot of black people trying to turn themselves into the ideas that make white people feel comfortable, and they try to turn themselves into a reflection of what whites see as black. And the Matilda Crowley character says to herself she's going to go in a different direction, because she sees nothing but tragedy going down that road. So she decides to go down the road with the goth subculture, because she believes that's going to take her in a direction that is positive. And the reason why I chose the goth subculture, because there's a lot of positivity in the goth subculture. A lot of people will sit there and say that the goth subculture is a dark culture, and that's not the case at all. It celebrates darkness, and it sees light in darkness, and it's a very positive culture filled with a lot of positive people. Yes, there are elitists and bullies in the goth subculture, but they're not that many. And the people who are part of the goth subculture pretty much call those guys out. Meanwhile, in most of the black culture, nobody calls out the thugs, the gangsters, and the dope dealers, and nobody holds them accountable. And this is one of the reasons why the Matilda Crowley character decided to go into the goth subculture, because she saw a place where she could be, one, she could be safe, two, she could be comfortable about being herself, and three, a place where she could find acceptance for being herself, and she could create a pathway towards achieving whatever goal she wanted to do in life. And she saw a better life paradigm for herself in the goth subculture. Those are the core reasons why she becomes a part of the goth subculture. And in the story of Spellbound, these are the early days of Matilda Crowley's journey into the goth subculture. And in that journey, I show tweens and teens how someone starts their journey into the goth subculture, because it's a long, slow process, and people just don't become goths overnight. It takes time, and I just go into the early days of her character transformation arc into that journey, where I show how she starts, working, changing her attitude, and then changing the way she dresses and the way she presents herself and her whole outlook. She starts to change the way she lives, and change what is reflected on the inside of her starts to become reflected on the outside of her. And instead of her trying to fit herself into a black box, she starts to become herself. And that's how she breaks the spell of the ideas of white supremacy and this whole ideology of fitting into a black box off herself. She starts to create her own identity, and that puts her in a clash with her white father. But that's a major plot point. But I really want to make a commentary about black people breaking away from this whole idea of trying to fit themselves into a black box, so they can be what white liberals see as black. and start becoming their own idea of being black. And and that's why I that's one of the reasons why I wrote the books, because I want black people to start seeing themselves reflected as what they see as black, not see what the world tells us black is. And one of the other reasons why I wrote Spellbound was because I was wanted to take a shot at writing my own interpretation of Gothic literature. In a previous video, I talked about Gothic literature and how dense it was and how it was hard to read for today's readers. And with Spellbound, I wanted to create a concept for Goth, what I call Goth YA fiction, fiction for today's tweens and teens. A story that is written with a shorter prose style, a bit more dialogue, and is a bit more easier to read, because today's readers, a lot of them don't want to sit there and read a piece of Gothic literature these days, a Jane Austen or a Frankenstein. A lot of that is really dense, and plus they don't really relate to it because it's not telling a story they can identify with. With Spellbound, I wanted to tell a story that kids of today could relate to, and I thought kids of today would like to know why somebody would join to become a part of the Goth subculture, what motivates them to become a part of the Goth subculture, and why they what things they had to deal with regarding how their parents reacted to it, how their parents responded to it, and the clashes they had with their parents, because the Matilda Crowley character has a major conflict with her father regarding her starting this journey into the Goth subculture, and she runs into many of the things that many baby bats or beginner Goths run into. Parents thinking that you are part of a cult, you are a devil worshiper, and in the story of Spellbound, I pretty much show people that Goths are not part of a cult. They do not worship the devil. Because Goth has absolutely nothing to do with religion, and I show people what the Goth subculture really is about. And this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I want kids to understand what the Goth subculture is all about, and moreover, I want their parents to understand what the Goth subculture is all about, because a lot of people misunderstand what this subculture is about. They misunderstand what the foundations of it are, because it is a music-based subculture. It started out in the late 1970s, after the punk era, and people need to understand, the roots of it. They need to understand what it's about, and I go in detail talking about this in Spellbound, in addition to making my commentary about the African American community at the time. And one of the reasons why I make that commentary is because I wanted to show how a lot of people look at the Goth subculture and think that it's a culture that's really dark, but I want to show you the horrors that went on in real life. And the horrors that went on during that dark period in the late 1980s, during that crack epidemic, they pale in comparison to what your average Goth kid presents in their bedroom, or the music that they listen to. It just pales in comparison, because if you had to live through that dark period like I did, you would really see, something truly dark. Because I remember as a kid, living in neighborhoods where the buildings next door to you, there are no buildings. It's just a whole bunch of abandoned lots, where there are shootouts every day, where there are drug addicts, again, lumbering about like zombies. And a lot of the buildings around you, which are around, are crumbling and falling apart. And that was life in late 1980s New York. And then you had these drug dealers who were pretty much cold-hearted people. They were pretty much killing people over turf, and they had no regard for human life. Again, this was one of the darkest periods in New York City history, and I lived through it, and that's one of the things that I draw on also for Spellbound, in addition to the living on the dark side of being light-skinned. And I also draw on my, experiences as a comic collector and my trips into places like the Village back then. And I also explore in Spellbound again um, uh, that commentary on a commentary on Black culture, and I really wanted to make a novel that took young readers into that time, and I also wanted to show them how someone starts their journey into the goth subculture, because every journey into the goth subculture is unique. Every person's journey is different, and everybody has their own story about why they became a goth. And I felt that it wouldn't be fair to just write the Spinsterella story about the Matilda Crowley character, who was an African American goth, without doing this origin story to show her beginnings and how she became a goth and how she became a part of the goth subculture. Spellbound will be available later this year in paperback and ebook format.